Even as a kid, I thought Harry Potter was kind of overrated, which is not the same thing as saying I disliked it, and I actively liked the first four books. However, even by the time I read the first three books, which all sort of got popularity in the US around the same time, I had already read a couple of YA fantasy series and books, and by the time book four and onwards were coming out, I had read a lot more of them, and I'd found so many YA fantasy series and some standalone novels that, to my mind, seemed so much better than Harry Potter that it was absolutely. I could not understand why my peers wouldn't even give these a try, but they were obsessed with Harry Potter. And of course, as an adult, this has become less frustrating and more of just a puzzle. What is it that made Harry Potter so much more successful than the YA fantasy series that I thought were generally better? And I've come up with a few possible answers. One that I've heard a lot of people claim, mostly people who loved Harry Potter until the author came out as transphobic, and then they suddenly looked for reasons to hate her, was that Scholastic was actively, aggressively promoting and marketing the books in the United States because they realized she had written in a bunch of merchandisable stuff. And I think that probably plays a role. It would not surprise me at all. Scholastic definitely plays a big role in what children read. And, I mean, a lot of it was the network effect, right? My peers were not listening to books I was recommending because I was low social status, and humans, as apes, generally look for recommendations from high social status people. So you get the popular kid reading Harry Potter, and then everyone else reads it too, right? And that's sort of how, especially child reading habits work. Although apparently, in like the more successful booktube niches, that's still how it works as well. But anyways, so that's one possible answer, and I think, again, it could play a role. Another thing that I identified is that J.K. Rowling basically throws in everything and the kitchen sink. Other YA fantasy typically had restrained, restricted magic systems that they carefully thought about how they interacted and limited what the characters could do. And J.K. Rowling just sort of threw in magic whimsically as it suited her and grabbed from basically every part of fantasy she knew of to sort of try to draw on that. And that is something that, when you see it a lot, it is bad writing. It's exhausting. Like I mentioned in my, I think it was my live stream, someone was asking about graphic novels, and I mentioned one of the things I tried reading that I really didn't like was the graphic novel Saga. And they did that, which initially it was charming to me, because I'm not usually reading a lot of the stuff that's doing this now that it's become trendy, but it became very tedious very quickly, which is not by far. There are bigger problems with Saga, but that was one element. So I think the kitchen sink thing is when you're the first person to really do it, or at least do it moderately well, as Rowling did, I think that is something that has sort of a novelty, sort of fun appeal, especially to sort of casual readers as well. And the third big factor that I've identified is that it is a neurotypical power fantasy. And, I mean, that should have been the obvious one, but one thing about that I've been thinking about is I've described my thinking as being upside down and outside in comparison to how most people think. And so I often can do things or realize things that impress people, and I'm like, no, it's obvious. And I've realized other people who think this way, it's the same thing. And so, like Idris Shah, Richard Feynman, they describe, and Arthur Conan Doyle writing Sherlock Holmes, they're like, it's obvious, it's easy, this is how. And then people boggle and say, no, it's like magic, because it's just thinking about things from the other way around. And so if you see people doing things that seem magic, and of course you have technology and stuff as well, then it becomes a fantasy, hey, I wish I could do this. And maybe that's overthinking it, but so there's at least three possible explanations for why Harry Potter became so popular. And I think one of the things with me is I was kind of making a category error by classifying Harry Potter as YA fantasy. Harry Potter was, again, it was just a book written for children to read to become an influential bestseller. And I've been thinking about two other books that are hugely or were hugely popular and influential in their cultures, which have a lot in common with Harry Potter, which I don't know that you could describe either of them as good books, but it shows Harry Potter may well have a lasting influence, for better or for worse. And these are The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan and The Story of Hong Gildong, which there's a Korean writer it's attributed to, but it's almost certainly written by some anonymous, basically the Korean equivalent of like pulp fiction writing in the 19th century. And so I want to talk about Pilgrim's Progress first, because it's probably the more recognizable title, and it's also the less obvious, less direct comparison. Like when I talk about Hong Gildong, there are a lot of very Harry Potter elements in here in a way that it's less overt in The Pilgrim's Progress, but I do think it's kind of there. And I was thinking about that because I mentioned in a previous video, so Henry Hitchings, how to really talk about books you haven't read. And he says that no one really reads The Pilgrim's Progress. I did because it was hugely impactful on English literature, and I found it an absolute slog. But at the time, it was hugely popular and appealed to people. And I realized, I think a big part of this is, it is sort of, for one thing, it's a kitchen sink story where he is like throwing in everything relevant he can think of. And the other thing is, it's a heavy-handed morality tale, which actually, like I knew someone who was talking about, I like Harry Potter because it teaches great moral lessons. And I'm like, what moral lessons? Wizard Hitler's evil? Like, to me, Harry Potter, like the morality is very facile and superficial and heavy-handed and not compelling. But apparently, a lot of people found it helpful, which is why so many people in my generation were comparing Dick Cheney to Voldemort. And so Pilgrim's Progress has this, a lot of early influential fiction is heavy-handed, does a lot of things we would consider very bad writing, does the whole kitchen sink thing, which is part of what makes it so tedious to read. But in that respect, it is Harry Potter-like. And so it's arguably a little bit more forced, but it did occur to me, like, hey, the elements that of Harry Potter that I think might have made it successful also might have been a factor in why The Pilgrim's Progress was genuinely popular with reading audiences when it came out. And then we have the story of Hong Gildong, and there's a whole bunch of versions, and this amazingly is the longest version, so it's a lot more compact than Harry Potter, obviously. But it's the story of a kid by a nobleman's concubine, and so he's illegitimate, or he's not entitled to even call his father father or his elder brother brother. And despite that, he is a model of filial piety. So of course he's not an orphan, but at the same time he's kind of alienated, estranged from his family, and I'm reminded reading it, oh, this is kind of like the Harry Potter with the Dursleys. And so then he discovers he has magic, and then he is sort of forced to flee, but he still serves the rightful ruler of in this case, Korea. So obviously, instead of Dumbledore, sort of rightful leader of the wizarding world, it is the whole world. There isn't like a distinction between the magical being secret. And he becomes a bandit and an outlaw. And then he is pardoned by the king, and he goes off and he finds a magic island where he overthrows the old rulers and installs himself as king and sets himself up married to 3 women, well, married to 1 and then concubines with 2 that he rescued. Which, as the translator points out, it's like he didn't learn like his own lesson from his own birth, right? Because he's still being polygamous but not legitimizing the children of 2 of his wives, the thing that drove him to this. But it's a different sense of morality, and it makes sense, and this has apparently been, say it's one of the 2 most popular sort of works of this nature in Korea. Even though I lived in Korea, really the only pop culture in Korea that I was heavily exposed to that was natively Korean was Pororo. I don't know if you know, that was like an animated penguin series thingy. And that was because I would get stickers to reward my students, and I thought the penguin stickers were cute, and so I learned how much kids love Pororo in Korea. And then I looked up, like, the introduction was on YouTube, and it seemed cute. But anyways, so the story here, like, it's similar trajectory to Harry Potter, and in fairness, this is a common story. It is the Horatio Alger story, according to Christopher Lasch. And so Christopher Lasch has argued Horatio Alger, and I still haven't read him, it's not, as people say, rags to riches. It's someone who legitimately is entitled to, like, fame and fortune and prestige and power or whatever, but is illegitimately deprived of it and gets his own back. And that's Harry Potter, right? He's the scion of one of the most important wizarding families, but instead he's low status in the human world, and then he gets it back and becomes high up person at the, like, wizarding government. Like, a lot of the same people who were comparing Dick Cheney to Voldemort after J.K. Rowling became persona non grata started talking about how Harry Potter is a story about a rich jock who becomes a cop. But it is the Horatio Alger pattern, which, again, my favorite writer, Jack Vance, does a lot of this too. So I'm not criticizing the pattern, to be clear. I'm saying this works, because it appeals to something in us. The idea that we are alienated from what we rightfully deserve, and we should be able to sort of get it back. but it represents this pattern of this person is sort of exceptional, was always exceptional and just unrecognized, and then this is how. But again, it's the specifics of the way he's treated, despite the fact that his father is alive, and his mother too, and he does have a relationship with her. And so he learns magic and becomes an outlaw, and then he's legitimated by the king, and in this case, he goes off to found his own kingdom. So again, not a perfect analogy, but it's closer than Pilgrim's Progress. And still, with both of these books, I think the thing that makes them work is it follows specific forms that work for the average person, and it ends up becoming exceptional, exceptionally popular, and influential, despite not being what I would think of as a good work. And I think that this is because, for me, as someone who reads a lot, right, I'm looking for people who are doing things that I recognize in ways that I would consider well, who are doing novel, original things. But for people who don't read a lot, or who read a lot but they want comfort, then you're looking for sort of appealing to these instincts. And there's, not only is there nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it ends up that, again, Pilgrim's Progress, hugely influential in English literature, and then Story of Han Gildong, apparently hugely impactful in terms of Korean media. And so, like, yeah, I just found that interesting, and I wanted to talk about it, and I was looking for something shorter I could do. But anyways, thanks for watching. I'm Magpie. If you want to support me, I have Ko-Fi, which I have a Discord here below, and then I have affiliate links. And anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.